that you're involved in, and certainly, it's what's going on in Newark is very different than what goes on in Camden. There's a continuum about how the state of New Jersey treats juveniles, certainly, and children in foster care, but there's different populations. And so, you might want to highlight a little bit the particular populations that you work with. And we'll get it kind of freewheeling at that point. I think we may talk about how COVID has impacted your populations, and it certainly has in many different ways, and maybe some of the recent legislation that may have happened that is benefiting juveniles who are incarcerated, expungements, those kinds of things. A lot of what I'm reading in applications revolves around that, and people who have had family members or friends who have ended up in the system and couldn't find ways out, couldn't figure out how to get things expunged, couldn't find legal help to get them through. So those are some of the running themes that have happened. Next week we are going to do one on immigration and international law, but I know that Randy, I think both of you have had instances where you've dealt with DACA, undocumented kids. So we'll get into a little bit of that also.
Yeah, I'm planning to talk a little about that, because that's a lot of the work I've been doing, Anita.
Okay, good. Okay, because there's lots and lots of people out there who have issues with immigration. So yeah, please bring all of that stuff into the conversation.
Okay.
We did, the last couple of sessions ended a little bit early. So if we've exhausted everything that we want to talk about, we might end a few minutes early. I have a feeling this one might go on for a while, so we'll see, but I'm definitely cutting it off at 1 o'clock. It's not going to go beyond 1.
Okay.
And if I can cut it off at, like 5 minutes to 1, I will do that. We're going to record it. And sure. Once I hit, let's see. Oh, it's recording now, which is.
Yeah, it's recording, Anita. I think we have a few attendees.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We're really pleased to have you joining us today for the third in our series of faculty conversations about major issues that are going on out in the world, and also the work that, in this case, that our clinics are doing in the areas of child advocacy and clinical justice. So we have with us today 4 wonderful faculty members, 2 from Camden and 2 from Newark, who run clinics in those areas, both child advocacy and juvenile justice. So what I'm going to do is have them introduce themselves. We are recording this. Please feel free to throw questions into the chat or into the Q&A. We do have my colleague Nancy Rupert from Camden will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A and make sure that your questions are answered. And it's going to be a lot of information, and I think a very interesting time as we plow through some of the major issues that are facing these populations here in New Jersey and in Camden. So Randy, why don't you start? Go ahead.
So welcome, everybody. It's really great to meet you virtually, and I hope one day to be able to meet you in person. I teach up in the Newark campus, and I run our child advocacy clinic up there. So pretty much all of the clients that the students work with, and that is the nature of a clinic, is that the students are doing hands-on work and working on real cases with clients. All of our clients are kids or youth, broadly defined. Some of them are in their early 20s, but really children and youth of all ages. And we do a lot of work with youth in the foster care system, and also undocumented children and youth, mostly unaccompanied children that have been designated as unaccompanied children. And I'll stop now and let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Great, thank you, Randy. Meredith, go ahead, you're next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meredith Shalik. I run the Child and Family Advocacy Clinic down in Camden. I do cases very similar to Randy, but we represent children in southern New Jersey, basically from Monmouth County South is sort of our catchment area that we represent kids. And we do the child abuse cases with the Division of Child Protection and Permanency. We do a lot of special ed cases in my clinic, and we also do children who are disabled or have significant medical needs. And we do what we call SSI, supplemental security insurance, so SSI cases with Social Security Administration. So I also run the expungement law clinic, which is not, I don't represent children in that clinic, but a lot of those people have juvenile records that I help expunge.
Great, thank you. Sandra, go ahead, you're next.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to be here, and I hope that someday I get to meet you in Camden. My name is Sandra Simpkins, and I've run the Children's Justice Clinic. And this clinic focuses on children who get arrested, children who are involved in the juvenile justice system, primarily in South Jersey.
Great, thank you. And Laura, how about you?
Hey everybody, it's so great to have you here. We are really looking forward to welcoming you in the fall, either in Newark or Camden, wherever you choose to be. So I direct the Criminal and Youth Justice Clinic, which, as its name implies, works in the carceral space involving young people and adults. Our clinic does a bunch of different types of advocacy on behalf of individual clients and also for systemic change. We represent young people who are incarcerated in New Jersey's juvenile prison system. This is work that Professor Simpkins and I started together a long time ago. We represent adults who were wrongfully convicted of serious offenses, primarily when they were adolescents, and are seeking some form of post-conviction relief. So that could be parole, it could be executive clemency, and it could be exoneration. So our clinic has been doing innocence work for about 15 years now, and we are about to launch the Rutgers, New Jersey Innocence Project. And we also do a lot of law reform work. So we file friend of the court briefs in the New Jersey Supreme Court. We do a lot of work in the state legislature that I hope we get to talk about in a little while. And the list goes on.
Thank you. Thank you for those introductions. We all know that the last 2 years have been unusual, to say the least, and that COVID has impacted many different areas of our lives, and certainly in the lives of your clients and the people that you serve. So Randy, can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've been seeing with your cases and how COVID has affected them?
So COVID has been really difficult for a lot of the families that the clinic I work with interacts with, in part because I'll focus on the immigrant families, and especially families where the parents and children may be undocumented. Were not eligible for any of the federal relief and the stimulus payments that were made because you have to have a social security number. And so they really are suffered and are still suffering quite severely, hunger issues. They also, the children don't necessarily get health insurance. So there were issues, if they got sick, about receiving medical care and housing. And there's great concern now because there's been a moratorium, but that's going to be lifted. And so really serious concerns about basic life necessities for our clients and their families.
Thank you. Sandra, I know there's been a lot on the juvenile justice side dealing with incarcerated youth, both Sandra and Laura, and how COVID has affected them. And either one of you want to speak a little bit about some of the things that your clinics have been involved in?
I really want to defer to Laura because she's been Professor Cohen, because she's really been spearheading all the work within the prisons around COVID. So let's turn it to Professor Cohen.
Great. Unmute yourself, Laura.
You would think after 2 years of this, I would remember. Anyway, yeah, so as I'm sure you've all read about in the papers, maybe you've had some personal interaction with people who are incarcerated during this time. COVID has been incredibly destructive within prisons, both adult prisons and youth prisons. The rates of infection were at times 3 times or higher than that, greater than the population of people on the outside. Incarcerated people were getting sick, staff were getting sick. The prisons, both adult and youth, which are at least allegedly there for rehabilitative purposes, have shut down all programming, have shut down schools, have shut down family visits. These places have really become almost impenetrable islands. And so the work that advocates, including our clinic, have had to do has been multi-pronged, aimed at both protecting individuals and also trying to drive better policies and safer policies within the prison system. So over the last couple of years, my students, our postgraduate clinical fellows, and I have been involved in a range of activities aimed at least trying to reduce the harm of COVID and to keep people safe. We've done a lot of individual advocacy on behalf of incarcerated folks, primarily youth, trying to extricate them from the system. So motions for resentencing, and also efforts to ensure that they were receiving the healthcare and other supports that they needed. We also got involved early on in system reform litigation, system change litigation that our partners at the Office of the Public Defender and the ACLU of New Jersey had brought to try, again, to extricate folks from the system. And so we participated as amicus curiae in a case in front of the New Jersey Supreme Court that led to a process for early release for some number of people who were getting close to maxing out on their prison terms, and provided a pathway for them to leave the system and protect the health of those people, and also by reducing the numbers, protecting the health of people inside. To the same end, we also were involved in advocacy, what ended up being successful advocacy, to enact legislation in New Jersey that accelerated the counting of time for folks and gave them extra credit as they were nearing the end of their sentences, so that they would max out sooner, and again, reduce the numbers of folks inside, which in turn permitted greater social distancing and reduced some of the strain on the healthcare system there. And we've been advocating throughout the entire 2 years to normalize and to bring things back into the youth prison system so that our clients can get the help they need and the interaction with their families that is so crucial.
Sounds intense, to say the least, and difficult work that your clinics and the students are involved in. I would imagine that as some of them are getting released from juvenile detention, they are juveniles and they may find themselves landing in the child advocacy area. Either Randy or Meredith, one of you can just unmute yourself and talk about that a little bit. If you found that some of these cases have then landed in your clinics, or are working, or if your students are working with some of those people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I know Randy and I often say, and I know Laura says and Sandra says, right, these are all the same kids. Like they get involved in the system simultaneously, and you know, they're all the same children, and so I think they do flow back and forth between our clinics, and certainly at times over the years, you know, Sandra, her office is across the hall, and I'm like, Sandra, I have a problem. I need help with a kid who's now been arrested for something. So I think that, and our students get to sort of work together, which is nice across these systems. But a few things related to the pandemic that we've seen in the child welfare system here in New Jersey. I mean, the biggest one that has impacted the students in our clinics is that court is now, for the most part, by Zoom still, which is great and bad. You know, it's sort of like a wonderful thing in terms of scheduling, and I can just get dressed from the top up. Look, that's like a huge advantage at times, right? But I think I really miss being able to see my students succeed in person in a courtroom setting. However, I think that one advantage is that the students have come through our clinics during the pandemic. You know, a lot of court is going to stay Zoom, and they now have that tool in their belt. They know how it works. They try to remember to unmute themselves, like all of those things that they got used to as clinic students. Many of the child welfare proceedings are going to remain Zoom for the time being. And because it has been so much more convenient for litigants and attorneys, and it's sort of more efficient for the court. I think another big one that happened during the pandemic, particularly in the beginning, was that the child welfare system shut down visitation and the delivery of services for our clients, the children, but also for the parents, right? And so the problem with that in the child welfare system is that there's a clock ticking in child welfare cases that reunification has to happen within a certain period of time. Otherwise, the court starts looking towards termination of parental rights followed by adoption. And so the sort of stopping of that clock in recognition of the pandemic did happen for the most part for termination cases. So a lot of cases sort of stopped the clock and did not move towards TPR, but for our clients, the kids, going weeks without seeing their parents was so damaging and so problematic. And that was really a frustrating thing to sort of see and try, we tried to do as much as we could by video chat and sort of more phone calls, but it's not the same thing as getting to see your parents and your siblings on a regular basis if they weren't placed in the same home. I also had a lot of trouble with some of my clients who needed to leave a foster home or needed to leave a program of some sort, and then they couldn't because of the pandemic and the lockdown. And so all of those things were problematic in the child welfare system. Two other things that I would mention is that, and something that Randy and I are both working on in terms of kids who are aging out of the system, and whether or not, because of the ongoing pandemic, the support that the child welfare system provides kids ages 18 to 21, if that could continue in New Jersey past the age of 21, given all the extra stress and expenses that are affiliated with the pandemic. So it's been something we've been trying to work with the Office of the Law Guardian and the Department of Children and Families on collaboratively. The last thing I would just mention is that because my clinic also does special ed cases, and there's actually a separate clinic in Newark that does special ed cases, but my students also pick up special ed cases. One of the big things has been something called compensatory education, and the fact that so many kids who had special education needs and IEPs and 504 plans, because of the way that New Jersey was delivering services, so much of their needs were being unmet. And so there's a period of time that we can request what we call comp ed, compensatory education. And so that's something that we're working with a lot of our clients and families on to make sure. Professor Valbardi up in Newark has been sort of leading that effort and including getting legislation passed to sort of extend the timeline in New Jersey. So lots of interesting pandemic related things have been happening in our clinics. It's changed the way we deliver our education to our students and our services to our clients. But the nice thing is that we figured out how to do it and that we know that there's so much that we can do now virtually that we had no idea was even possible.
Randy,
I just want to echo a little bit, two things that Meredith just said. I mean, one is these are very much all the same kids. I mean, my clinic has a project where we represent all, and this is actually a joint project with Professor Gottesman, who runs the Immigrant Justice Clinic down in Camden, where we represent all children in foster care who need an immigration attorney, that have some immigration need. And so you're seeing kids that are part of the immigration system and child welfare system. And then some of those kids get in trouble and they're part of the juvenile justice system. And so, they very much are the same children, and we all really try to work collaboratively. I mean, Laura might have a case that has an immigration issue. She'll look to me and vice versa if my client has a juvenile justice issue. So, we really do work quite collaboratively. I think one other challenge that the pandemic has caused is even just certainly court being on Zoom and a lot of court delays, but meeting with our clients has been a challenge, especially for my clinic, the clients are all kids. We are very much used to, we spend a lot of time talking about how to interview and counsel our child clients. And a lot of that gets even more challenged when we can't actually be with the. So we've gotten creative. I mean, certainly some meetings have taken place over Zoom, but we've also done a lot of things outside when we can, and if possible, inside socially distanced. But it has definitely pushed us to be very creative about even just meeting with our clients, which is just so important.
It's interesting how we never did things video before, never did things virtual before, and once the pandemic hit, all of a sudden we had to turn on a dime and figure out ways that, especially for your clinics that deal with the court system, how to keep servicing your clients in a way that is in the best interest for them, and to make sure that the best outcome happens for them. So a lot of creative thinking had to go into that, and I'm sure that the students were able to provide new ideas for ways that we could push all that forward. I'm sure that there is one case that you worked on over the course of so many years that really sticks out for you, and one that you felt very, very proud of, and that you thought, wow, that was just an amazing victory for me. I know there's a lot of them, but I'm sure that there's one that you really is close to you, and that students have worked on maybe over the course of years. You may have had students over a very number of classes that have worked on particular cases. So if you could just talk a little bit about a case that you really thought was really extraordinary. Sandra, why don't you start first?
Yeah, so I'll start. I mean, there are so many across my career that are really deep to my heart, and my whole family knows their name. But I'm just going to pick a really recent one that I was particularly proud of. And so after the murder of George Floyd, every case that we've had, we've tried to intentionally raise race where it was an issue. And that has been very successful for us, where we actually raise specific motions regarding racial biasing and profiling by police officers in Camden, and asking the prosecutors to look at things through that lens. And when we get cases dismissed after raising those issues, that is really cool. And I'm very proud to be a part of that. And we've had a lot of success in that area.
Great. Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, so like Sandra, I mean, when you've done this for a long, long time, you end up having both clients that resonate with you and that who you remember, and also students who were working with those clients and really devoted themselves so passionately to the work that resonates. So it's hard to choose one of these, but I'll just share with you very briefly. As I mentioned, our clinic does a lot of innocence work, and innocence cases take a long time. Sometimes they can take a decade. And so we've had several exonerations over the years that took somewhere between 6 and 8 years to 10 or 12 years to see through to the end. And if you think about these in terms of semesters, what that means is that you have somewhere around, in a 10-year case, maybe 40 clinic students who were involved at some point working with this client. And so one of our most recent exoneration cases was in 2019. And on the day that the client was exonerated, there's nothing like an exoneration day. There's nothing like showing up in court and having a judge say to your client, you were harmed, you were wronged, your rights were not protected, and we are sorry, and we're undoing, to the best that we can, the devastation that you and your family experienced. And on this particular exoneration day, 12 or 14 students who had worked with the client over the years came to court and were there with him at the time of exoneration. And that's just one of those moments that I will always remember to the end of my days.
And I think with the new Innocence Project that is coming on board, and I should say it's a revival. We've had an Innocence Project before, but I don't think it's going to be as robust as this new project is going to be. I think we're going to see a lot more of those victories happening as we, and some of you, sometimes you also work with law firms that might partner with you to help push things along. And it's really exciting to see and for students to see what is possible and what can happen. And even if corporate law firms get involved in some of the cases that you're working on, I think they can also envision themselves working in a corporate area and also having the power of a corporate firm helping them in pro bono areas so that things can work quicker in some ways. So it's really exciting to see those kinds of collaboration. Randy, I'm sure you've got a great story to tell.
So yeah, it's hard to pick that when you're as old as I am, but one that comes to mind now because the issue is coming back up in a case that the clinic has now is the clinic was very involved in when children are adopted and are out of the foster care system and are adopted into separate adoptive homes. It wasn't clear in the law that they would have the right to see each other because New Jersey is what's called a closed adoption state. So the court can't order that the child gets to see a parent or a sibling, or at least it couldn't with regard to siblings. So the clinic had a case where it was really important to the kids that they be able to see each other. So we helped to establish law that for at least siblings, if they're adopted in separate foster homes, and if we can show that they'd be harmed and psychological harm is acceptable, that the court can order that they can see each other. And I just, think about all of my clients with that. And we have a case right now where we're representing two sisters, both of whom have some significant disabilities, but they love each other so much. And because of their disabilities, they really can't be adopted in the same home. But one of the adoptive parents is not willing to really guarantee that the children will see each other. And so we are going to have to use the law that we established to fight for the court to order that in the case that we're dealing with now.
That makes me also wonder about the adoption process and when children end up in foster care and then finally have to go through the adoption process. And you have to work sometimes with families that have no relation to the children. And oftentimes you're working with families that it could be extended family, it could be an aunt and uncle, an older sibling that could adopt them. Those are also difficult cases as well, because there's support that has to be provided for that person who is taking on the added task, often grandparents. And I remember when you've had open houses here for caretakers,
Yes.
and for people who and grandparents who have taken in children as foster children, and seeing all of the services that you've been able to provide for them is really extraordinary. Meredith, you must have a great case that you can talk about.
Sure. I think that, well, first, the same way that Laura was talking about how exoneration days are like the best days, like that's the way in our field in child welfare, we feel about adoption days. I mean, I also feel that way about reunification days, right? So when our clients get reunified with their parents, that's also a big, exciting moment in a case, but there's something special about when the judge, creates this new legal bond between a parent and a child they're adopting. And one of the cases that sticks out to me was because one of the law students working on the case was himself adopted through the foster care system. And he shared that with the class, and then he helped his client get adopted. And there was not a dry eye in that courtroom anywhere. It was very exciting. And his adoptive parents were there. It was a very nice moment. Those don't happen very often, but that was great. And sort of one other example I'll talk about in terms of the tenacity that our students often have in working on these cases. One of our clients, we were looking for some extended family, as you were just talking about, and you just sort of some kin, as we call them, to try to help our client maybe find permanency. And she talked with the students when they were meeting with her at her foster home, who was not interested in adopting her. So we were trying to find someone else. She mentioned that she has the same birthday as her Aunt Beth. And they would always go out to eat together on their birthday. But she didn't know Beth's full name, but she knew that she lived in Gloucester City, which is a town down here near Camden. And so my students started calling every Elizabeth they could find until they found her. And it just, it was just one of those moments that I just don't know that us old folks would do. I mean, I hope we would, but the students were just dedicated to find Aunt Beth, and it worked out well. luckily it was a smaller city, so there weren't that, but they had to call like maybe like 25 people to find her. So it's just those moments that like those successes that you see sort of students shining in that sort of makes our job amazing. And we're all very, very fortunate to have it.
That's really a great story. I love that. We have a question in the chat for Professor Simpkins, and I'll read you the question. Could you give examples of what criteria are used in the motions for dismissal based on race bias, the ingredients which constitutes race bias on the part of police officers, and how easy/hard it is to prove?
Wow, that's a great
lot.
I'm not going to be able to answer all of that for you. But I'm really glad that you're asking those questions, and you belong here because we can talk for a long time about that and all the Fourth Amendment issues that you rose. I guess what I just want to answer with is, it sounds vague, but a lot of it is reading the discovery. Like an individual case, you have an individual client, so you listen to what your client's story is, you hear about the circumstances, and you read the discovery. And then, we're all very well versed in constitutional law and Fourth Amendment rights. And so we can see quickly when the officer, shouldn't have done what they did. And we know the law to back it up. But what's new is that working with the center in Georgetown, has been extraordinarily helpful because they have a brief bank, you know what I mean? And they have all these materials that we're able to use and craft and put into persuasive letters and motions. And so I think the cumulative knowledge of working across, outside of New Jersey to other experts in the field on this is what's making the difference.
Any other questions from our students? Go ahead and throw them into the chat or into the Q&A. There's so much going on right now in terms of anti-racism, anti-bias, discrimination. The law school is going through an audit of its courses to make sure that across the board, we are including issues related to race and discrimination in our courses and the way that they are taught. In your particular clinics, I'm sure that it is so pervasive that these issues have come up. Is there anything in particular that comes to mind when you're thinking about how you have to deal with racism and discrimination, particularly in the criminal justice system, which is a difficult system? Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that we're talking about this. So like Professor Simpkins, our clinic has been integrating what we know about racial bias, what we know about the history of structural racism in this country, what we know about the straight line between enslavement and mass incarceration into our advocacy for a number of years. So just as a couple of examples, we participated in a case in front of the New Jersey Supreme Court a couple of years ago, in which the question was whether or not three young Black men who were stopped by the police in Camden, in fact, were stopped by the police and not free to leave, or alternatively were, in a position where they could just walk away. And a lot of the case law development in this area has kind of focused on either implicit or explicit bias on the part of the police. But what hasn't really started to happen yet is any examination of the different experiences and the different perceptions that people have in their interactions with the police based on the color of their skin. And where a white person, somebody who looks like me, might feel very free to walk away from police, someone who is Black, and particularly a young Black person, may not feel that same freedom to leave. And so we submitted this brief in the New Jersey Supreme Court, in which we asked the court to take the history of racism and the history of predation, for lack of a better word, by the police into account in evaluating whether these three young men were in fact in police custody, and therefore the police didn't have the right to ask to search their car and didn't have the right to question them. And so, like Professor Simpkins, we're trying to integrate all of this into our advocacy. It comes up, I don't think that we're doing our job correctly, especially in the criminal and youth justice space if we are not raising race at every single opportunity, and we're trying to do that. I will also say just with regard to the larger curriculum, not only are we doing this audit, but we are experimenting with a pilot first year elective course over this year and probably over next year too, that will give first year students the opportunity to take just a 1 credit class during one of those 2 semesters that's focused on law and inequality in a particular context. So this semester, I've got a great group of 1Ls who I'm teaching law and inequality, mass incarceration. And the discussions have just been phenomenal. I'm learning so much from them. It's really, kind of a journey together.
That's
And I've been
great.
teaching one of those classes with some other colleagues with regard to immigrant justice and immigration. And also it's just been a great group of students, and we've been having some really, interesting and important discussions in class.
And there's been lots of different topics, and they've all come out of the faculty and in areas in which they have expertise. It might be housing, it could be in elder care, it could be in the education system, it could be access to Social Security benefits and disability benefits. So as that program develops over the years, I think students coming in next year will see a very robust list of courses that are offered both in Camden and Newark. And it's another way to kind of dip your toe into an area of law that you might be interested in, but you're not sure if that's something that you want to focus your life career on. But it does give you this amazing perspective on how much law affects so much of what's going on in society, and how it's a powerful tool for making changes and making positive changes in the way all of us live and how we treat each other, most importantly. Okay, let's see, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So one thing I do want to mention to the students is some of the clinics do have prerequisites. For example, if you are going to court, you do have to be in your 3rd year of law school. We in Newark, and I'm sure in Camden as well, have information sessions that are run by our clinic directors and people who work in the clinic about how you can get involved and register for a clinic. There is no applying apparatus. You don't have to apply and be interviewed, but there are some prerequisites that you would have to fulfill before doing some of the clinics. Others, no, you can do it without any prerequisites except for the first year curriculum. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Arthur Kanoy, who was one of our faculty members who really started the clinic program here in Newark. And Professor Kanoy represented the Chicago 7. And there's a famous picture of him. He was this little man who was in Chicago, and there's a picture of him, yelling at a police officer. And there were demonstrations that were going on. It was during the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968, and people were arrested. There's a film called The Trial of the Chicago 7. You should absolutely watch it. And there's a picture of him, pointed at a police officer, like, you can't do this. And from Professor Kanoy started our Constitutional Rights Clinic, now the Constitutional Litigation Clinic, and the clinic, the 16 clinics that now encompass both Camden and Newark have started from one person's idea, and the faculty have embraced it. They've expanded on it. It is part of our fabric. It is part of your education as students, where you will be able to actually work closely on cases and briefs and things that are really important to the lives of the people here in both Newark and Camden. Okay, so last words. Go ahead, Randy, you go first.
Anita, I think there's a question.
There's a question.
Oh, is there?
And
Oh, I
I
missed
think,
it. Okay.
and I think we can sort of take that and wrap it up. So Kids in Need of Defense is a wonderful organization called short for KIND. My clinic actually works really closely with KIND and takes cases from them at times. So I'm a huge fan of KIND. But to answer the question, which is a really excellent question and hard to answer question, but I guess I'd sort of say 3 things. I mean, one is that, I think all of us in our clinical programs, we don't stop fighting. So, if we have a loss, we'll appeal it usually, and we will keep fighting. That doesn't always lead to success and what the client wants or needs, but it can. I think also we're all involved in both individual casework and systemic. And so while we can't always win the individual cases, I think also working on more of the systemic issues, can at least make you feel like you're trying to solve the problems that led to the defeat, to use your word. But it can be hard. And then the final thing I'll say is, I've always worked with kids in my whole legal career. And what I love about working with kids is there's always hope. And so many of them are so resilient despite such awful circumstances that are in their childhood. And they bring me hope and they inspire me. So on the bad days when, I try to remember, that. And I'll let my colleagues.
So Anita, I just want to jump in on that question too.
Yeah.
I think I agree with everything Randy said. And I think that one of the critical pieces of being in a clinic is that you're in a community. And so when something that you don't want to, an outcome that you don't want happens, you're with other people, you know what I mean? And having that community around you can be incredibly helpful. But also in the clinic, it's also a space to talk about the importance of self-care, and how you need to take care of yourself personally if you're going to be in this work. But thank you so much for bringing up that question. It really is an important one.
Okay, so any final words for our students who are on? Meredith, why don't you go first? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add that I also feel as your clinic professor, it's part of my job to teach you about coping skills and transference and things that come up that, 25 years ago, nobody taught me about. And I struggled a lot and early in my career in terms of how to handle the sort of pressures and feeling I was supposed to save everyone. So I always, when we go through those classes and have those discussions, I always laugh with my students that like French fries and Chardonnay are not a good coping skill. Like you need them, but they're not.
I don't know, Meredith. They're still pretty good coping skills, I think.
There are other things you can do that are more productive, but the reality is that being a lawyer, no matter where you practice, is very stressful. And so you have to figure out how to balance that with life and family demands. So
And there's also times when you need the long term, you need the long view and not the short view. What may not go well today, a couple of years down the road might have a turn for the better. And so it might be another student that may have taken over whatever the defeat was and then made victory out of the defeat. I think Laura knows that well from some of the Innocence Project cases that they've worked on and people who have been convicted of terrible crimes, and years later, it's like, they found the one thing that had exonerated this poor person who's been in jail all this time. Okay. Any other final remarks from anyone? Just go ahead and unmute yourself and then we'll certainly wrap it up. Go ahead.
Come to Rutgers. It's great here. It's great here. Our students are like no other students in the country. I hope you're getting a sense of what our clinical faculty is, our entire faculty. It's a really vibrant place. And I feel so lucky to be teaching here and working with these students.
I just want to say that if anybody has any additional questions, I'm happy to answer any emails or texts, and I can put my cell phone number in the chat if you have any other questions. I also want to say that among the people in this group right now, there are contacts to every child serving organization in the tri-state area and beyond, way beyond. And many of our former students work there too. And so that's really one of the beautiful things about having emerged law school, because there are so many alumni resources that can help you with your career.
Right. Meredith and I did a presentation yesterday for the Office of Law Guardian. It was just so wonderful. And I know she felt it as well to see on the Zoom list so many of my former students. So it was really great. So I'm just going to echo what Laura and Sandra have said, that you should come to Rutgers. I've taught at other law schools, but when I got to Rutgers, I haven't left. So it's just really a wonderfully diverse place that cares about social justice and cares about its students. So, and I also, I'm happy to take questions after today if you have them.
You can also go to our website and find in the faculty directory, you will find biographies for all of our participants today, for all the faculty at the law school with contact information. So next week, I do want to put in a plug. We're going to do some more work with clinics. So the Immigration and Human Rights session on March 8th, starting at 12:15, will also cover our centers on immigration and also our immigration clinic, among some other clinic offerings. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the panelists for your dedication and the hard work that you do. And we really, truly appreciate that you are all here. Thank you so long.
Bye-bye.
Have a great
Take care.
afternoon. Thank you.